Okay, well, gonna go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Good morning. My name is Alicia O'Loughlin and I'm an engagement coordinator for the State Water Board's Office of Public Participation. Welcome to the Drinking Water Infrastructure Funding Stakeholder Meeting. This meeting is for information gathering purposes to collect input on potential funding guidelines for the drinking water infrastructure funding that was appropriated in the 2021 Budget Act. We have invited this group of stakeholders here this morning with experience related to drinking water infrastructure projects and particularly drinking water consolidations to engage in a facilitated discussion. Given the limited time available for today's meeting, board staff will be prioritizing comments and responses to questions from stakeholder representatives. However, for those of you listening in the audience that are not at the table, we do welcome your questions and input as well, and I'll be going over the different ways to participate in just a moment. First, I'd like to go over the Zoom features we'll be using today. You can find the taskbar at the bottom of your Zoom window. We're doing our best to make sure that everyone can participate in an effective way and that this time is valuable for you. So if you're a panelist, we ask that you raise your hand when you would like to ask a question or provide a comment. You can raise your hand through the reactions icon. And when it's your turn, your name will be announced and you will be asked to unmute yourself. You can also use Zoom's Q&A feature. However, please note that questions asked through the Q&A will be responded to within the Q&A and they will not be part of the facilitated discussion. If you're an attendee, you can also provide comments and ask questions using Zoom's Q&A feature. But again, your questions will be responded to within the Q&A and your comments will be recorded. There will be an opportunity to ask questions and provide comments after each funding proposal. And there will be an additional opportunity for questions and discussion at the end of the presentation. Please note that we're still early in the development process, so we likely will not have answers to all questions at this time. However, any questions asked today will help to inform and guide us with what to present at the public workshop on December 16th. Slide, please. Now I'd like to just take a moment to review some guidelines. This meeting and its Q&A are being recorded and the video recording will be posted on the State Water Board's website. Panelists, we ask that you mute yourselves when you're not speaking, and please make sure that your screen name reflects your actual name. To do that, tap the participation button on the taskbar, hover over your name, click more, and then within the drop-down menu, select rename. In case you get disconnected, please rejoin the meeting. And if you have technical assistance, you can email opp-contact@waterboards.ca.gov or use Zoom's Q&A feature to request assistance. And finally, this is a 2-hour meeting. We do not have a scheduled break, so please take breaks as needed. We have staff from the Division of Financial Assistance presenting today, who will be introduced in just a moment. We also have staff working behind the scenes to make sure that we have as few bumps as possible. And we'd like to thank them for supporting this process. Now, I'd like to introduce Bridget Chase from the Division of Financial Assistance.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We're so glad you can join us today for the Drinking Water Infrastructure Funding Stakeholder Meeting. My name is Bridget Chase, and I'm a supervising engineer in the Division of Financial Assistance, Office of Sustainable Water Solutions. The Budget Act of 2021 allocated $1.55 billion to the State Water Board for a handful of different programs listed on this slide. So today's meeting will focus on the $650 million available for drinking water projects with priority given to disadvantaged communities, or we refer to them throughout as DACs. Today's presentation will start with a summary of the funding that is available for drinking water projects. I will then go over some useful definitions and acronyms that will be used in the following slides and discussions. We intend to give the infrastructure appropriation funds out through our existing Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, or DWSRF program. Therefore, I will go over the existing grant criteria for the program and then discuss some potential changes. At the end of our meeting, we will share the best ways to stay informed on the drinking water infrastructure appropriation funding as well. So there are a few provisions tied to the drinking water appropriation. Because 5% of the allocation may be used for administrative costs to run the program, $617.5 million will be available for grants. The majority of these grants will go directly towards systems for planning and construction projects, but some of these funds can also be used for technical assistance. We can give up to 10% of the funds for technical assistance and capacity building in disadvantaged communities. The funds need to be committed to projects before June of 2024, and then the funding needs to be fully dispersed by June of 2026. On August 18th, the State Water Board approved a resolution that authorized the Division of Financial Assistance to encumber up to $100 million from the drinking water allocation. The initial $100 million will be encumbered to projects consistent with the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan, or IUP, except that any funding caps in the IUP may be waived. Today, we're looking to solicit input from you on an implementation plan for the remaining $517.5 million that is available for the drinking water projects. We anticipate going back before our board early next year for approval to encumber the remaining funds. So the infrastructure appropriation specifies that funding priority shall be given to disadvantaged communities. Most of the existing grant funding that we currently have through the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program is directed towards small disadvantaged communities as well. To be considered disadvantaged, a community needs to have a median household income, or MHI, of less than 80% of the statewide MHI. In general, MHI determinations will be based on the entire service area of the system using the American Community Survey data, or ACS data, through the census website. The MHI is determined using the census geography that best represents the community. According to this year's data, a disadvantaged community, or DAC, is a community with an MHI of less than 60,188. The ACS data is updated annually, and the State Water Board uses new data starting April 1st of each year. A severely disadvantaged community, or SDAC, is a community with an MHI of less than 60% of the statewide MHI. The 2015 through 2019 ACS data shows that a community with an MHI of less than 45,141 would currently be considered a severely disadvantaged community. Moving on, small communities for drinking water funding are those that have a population of no more than 10,000 people or 3,300 connections. An expanded small community is slightly larger, with between 3,300 and 6,600 service connections, or a population of up to 20,000 people. Lastly, on this slide, the following grant criteria mentions eligible non-transient non-communities, or NTNCs. An NTNC owned by a K-12 public school district is deemed to serve a severely disadvantaged community. For all other eligible NTNCs, the median household income of the small community they serve will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis based upon the intended customer base. So most of the time in the following slides, when we refer to an eligible NTNC, we're talking about a public school. Currently, planning and design grants are available to small disadvantaged communities. Projects may receive up to 100% grant funding with no planning grant cap. Rather, the planning funds awarded to a community count towards the total amount of grant funds available to that community within a 5-year period. Our current grant caps are based on the cost per residential connection, and all planning, design, and construction and technical assistance funds that system or community receives goes towards the cap. We don't propose any changes at this time to the planning grant funding criteria. Construction grant funding criteria is split depending on the type of project being funded. Projects are ranked by categories that are defined by the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund policy starting on page 7. So the State Water Board is prioritizing funding to systems experiencing serious public health issues or to consolidate. Projects ranked in categories A through C are designated to address more serious drinking water public health issues. So some examples of what falls under category A through C includes waterborne disease outbreaks attributable to the water system, contamination in excess of the maximum contaminant level or MCL, insufficient source capacity or water delivery capability, surface water that is not adequately treated or filtered, and then lastly, uncovered distribution reservoirs. So typically at DFA, infrastructure projects that we see in these categories might include a new well or multiple wells, treatment, or physical consolidation. Current grant criteria indicates that category A through C or consolidation projects may receive up to $60,000 per connection. And when I talk about connection, I'm talking about per residential connection. Projects that serve small disadvantaged communities and eligible NTNCs, or again, most likely schools, may receive up to 100% grant. Expanded small disadvantaged communities and small non-disadvantaged communities may be eligible for up to 75% grant. So at this point, we will transition to presenting some potential changes to the existing drinking water grant criteria that we would like your input on today. Additional details will be included in the slides to follow, and we will take questions and comments after each proposal is presented. Alicia is going to provide a quick reminder on how to participate in the discussions.
Thank you. As a reminder to panelists, please raise your hand if you have a question or comment, and when it's your turn, I will introduce you and you will receive a request through Zoom to unmute yourself. When your name is called, please state who you're representing today. And we kindly ask that you be mindful of the time that we have this morning and try to keep your questions and comments succinct. For all of those participating as attendees, again, we ask that you submit all questions and comments using Zoom's Q&A feature. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Bridget to go over the funding proposals.
Great, thank you. So as a reminder, an expanded small community is one with between 3,300 and 6,600 connections, or a population between 10,000 and 20,000 people. So currently, expanded small disadvantaged communities and small non-disadvantaged communities are only eligible for up to 75% grant for these higher category A through C projects or consolidation projects. Question for you guys today is, should we change the criteria to be up to 100% grant for these communities? By increasing the grant portion to 100%, less application documents would be required, as a loan would not be necessary. This would also reduce the potential need for a community to raise rates to complete a project. Some additional questions for you is, should we further expand grant criteria for these priority projects to make medium-sized systems of up to 100,000 people eligible for grant funding? This could potentially make some grant funding available to slightly larger cities such as Atwater, Reedley, or Yuba City. And then just to provide a recent example of a community that may benefit from this additional type, the Arvind Community Services District recently completed a project to address their arsenic MCL violations. When the district received their funding agreement from us, they barely qualified as an expanded small DAC because their population and service connections were so high. So if they were to come back now, their population and service connections are now over those limits of an expanded small DAC, but they would be eligible if we had this new medium DAC community type. If you agree that we should expand grant funding to medium water systems, should they also be eligible for 100% grant? Should we require a medium system to have higher water rates to be grant eligible, or fund regardless of what their water rates are? To ensure adequate funds are reserved for smaller disadvantaged communities, should we have a maximum grant per project for these medium systems? An example of a project cap might be 20 million max per project. So now we will begin taking comments and questions on the proposal to broaden existing grant criteria for category A through C and consolidation projects. And before we start talking about this, I also just wanted to mention that the following couple slides will go over the other categories as well. So this is specific to the A through C and consolidation.
Thank you. Looks like we have a question or comment from Danielle. And Danielle, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. And I want to make sure my day job is with CMUA, but today I'm representing the California Nevada section of AWWA. I think the short answer to both of the questions is yes. I think especially for the medium disadvantaged community, I think providing as much flexibility as possible with this funding would be really helpful. And so I would definitely encourage the state board to move forward with adding the new eligible category and also making the expanded small DACs and small non-DACs eligible for 100% funding.
Thank you for that. And Erin McCauley.
I also support this partly because consolidation projects with these types of communities, it's very difficult to do with a 75% grant because those customers would be coming in to a larger system, presumably at the rates of the existing system. And for those of us who are investor-owned utilities, it's very difficult for us to spread those costs out among our entire customer base because of issues with the Public Utilities Commission and our bringing on customers and not bringing them on, and then adding costs to our other customers. It seems to reduce some of those complications by allowing those customers to come on at basically for free from the context of the utility and the existing customers.
Thank you, Erin. Dawn White.
Yes, hi, good morning. I agree as well. I know we had some conversation about this in the Saver Advisory Group meeting yesterday. And I just want to echo what the participants have said so far, that these categories should be expanded. I think there does need to be under 2 in the second bullet, regardless of rates. I don't know about a particular level, but I think this bullet deserves more discussion, because if a community has very, very low rates that can't support it going forward, I think it needs to be part of the conversation when applying for the grant to make sure the rates are sufficient to sustain that particular system. So that's the only qualification, is I think this needs more discussion, but I wholeheartedly agree to expanding these categories.
So if I could just add to that point, that's a great point. The idea with the regardless of rates is we would definitely, before we give any funding, we would make sure that the recipient is able to operate and maintain their system. So that's still something that we look at as far as the rates being sufficient for that. When we're talking about regardless of rates, we see this more in the lower category of projects where we require rates to be at least 1.5% of their median household income. So that's something that we're kind of considering there. Like maybe we require the rates to be so high in order to qualify for it.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Wood.
Yes, thank you. I'm the city manager at the city of Greenfield. And I agree with just about everything that Dawn White said. And related to the rates, I'm a firm believer that it should not be regardless of rates for the reasons that she said. My background is in finance, and the way I've always looked at water and wastewater systems is that they actually, to the extent possible, they should be self-sustaining, and the rates are the prime driver of that. So without, getting into, I agree with Ms. Chase as well, that it's probably the smaller systems that have issues with trying to keep their rates low. That's great. The rate should be as low as we can handle, but the rate should also encompass a capital CIP component to it that will help, replace, expand, what have you, the facilities as they need to be. So I think definitely rates need to still be taken into consideration.
Thank you for your comments. Omar.
Alicia, can I just provide one more little bit of clarification on that, just to make sure it's kind of clear? So as Bridget said, as an example, in this category A through C group, for example, like a small disadvantaged community that fits into these categories, we don't require them to have a specific rate in order to qualify for grants. That said, as Bridget said, we still do definitely look at their revenues, make sure that they're adequate to cover expenses before we would consider approving construction funding. So that's always going to be a part of our process for any grants that we provide. So I think the question that we're really trying to get at is, need to be at least 1.5% in order to be eligible for grants. And so to sort of hone in on which medium DACs should be eligible, is that something we should consider adding to the equation just strictly for grant eligibility? Hopefully that's clear.
Yeah, I think it should be. I think it definitely should be, as much as possible, because otherwise it's an endless trip to, grant land is what I call it. So thank you.
Thank you. Just want to make sure we're clear.
Okay, thank you. Omar Castro. And Omar, you may need to unmute yourself.
Yes, Omar Castro, City of Oxnard. I'm the water manager. I also agree with expanding this. I do have a question on the criteria, and thank you, Megan, for clarifying that, because you mentioned construction projects. If they were to qualify, could these be used for annexation fees? Or is it strictly a construction project to integrate into your existing water system?
So we can pay for annexation fees and connection fees. Like if it's a consolidation type project, that is something that's eligible. It would just have to be within those limits that are currently in the intended use plan or in the proposed new intended use plan, which is currently $60,000 per connection.
Thank you.
Oops, now I'm muted. Mickey Rich, please. I think we lost Mickey momentarily. Hopefully he'll get back. How about Kerry Swain?
Hi, this is Kerry Swain from Coachella Valley Water District, and I fully support the potential changes that are being considered. We do have a large amount of disadvantaged communities, but we are on the bigger range of having more than about 100,000 customers. So this will definitely help us facilitate and provide the needed improvements and also consolidation to provide the services that is desperately needed in those disadvantaged communities as well.
Thank you. Brent Smith.
Oh, hi. Yeah. Brent Smith, Director of Technical Services here at Placer County Water Agency. And I wholly support, Danielle and AWWA's position. Flexibility is very important. This is important work. And so whatever can be done to add flexibility to assist these small, struggling water systems, I fully support.
Thank you. We're going to take one more comment and then we should move on to the next slide for the sake of time. Angelina Mancias.
Good morning. This is Angelina Mancias with the Water Replenishment District. Just want to echo my fellow panelists' sentiments here. In the WRD service area, there are several systems that would qualify as DAC. However, the size makes them ineligible for grant funding. And through our Safe Drinking Water program for DACs, we do help with technical, managerial, and financial assistance for grant applications when they do qualify. And this would help us a great deal in ensuring that those grants are available for our pumping community. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and I'm going to pass it back to Bridget and we'll move on to the next slide.
Great. So we will now move on to grant criteria for the remaining eligible project types, or category D through F. Projects that fall into these categories include, but are not limited to, water meters, community water systems with a single source or no backup supply, distribution of water that exceeds secondary drinking water standards, distribution of water in excess of a published chemical notification level, and then other deficiencies attributable to the water system that address present or future violations of health-based standards. So typical projects that we see in DFA under these categories include distribution system repairs or replacements, upgrades or repairs to water treatment plants, a new well, or installation of water meters. Category D through F projects have a lower cap of $45,000 per connection. As you can see in this table, grant funding for these types of projects can be different depending on the community served by the project. And these are often tied to the water rates that that system is charging their residential users. So kind of going back to that conversation we were just having. Small severely disadvantaged communities and eligible NTNCs, or again, most likely schools, are eligible for up to 90% grant regardless of their water rates. Small disadvantaged communities and expanded small DACs are required to have water rates of at least 1.5% of their MHI to qualify for these grants. So to put that into perspective, if a community's MHI is 50,000, then they would need water rates of at least $62.50 a month to be eligible for this grant funding. If the water rates are high enough, a small DAC may be eligible for up to 75% grant. An expanded small severely disadvantaged community may be eligible for up to 50%, and then an expanded small disadvantaged community may be eligible for up to 25% grant. So this is what's in our current intended use plan. The following slide will give some proposals of things that we could change with this additional influx of money.
Thank you. And with that, we'll start taking comments about.
Actually, sorry.
Oh,
one more slide.
Oh, my bad.
They need to know what to comment on first.
No.
State Water Board staff would like your input on the following proposals of category D through F projects. So should we consider increasing the grant percentage for all or some of these community types? We could potentially make all small disadvantaged communities and expanded small DACs eligible for up to 100% grant. Should we eliminate the requirement for small DACs to have water rates of at least 1.5% of their MHI? So again, we would do the check to make sure that they could operate and maintain their system. This is just a requirement of them to be so high in order to be eligible for grant. So now we will begin taking comments and questions on the proposals to broaden existing grant criteria for these D through F projects. Back to you, Alicia.
Thank you. Do we have any comments? Okay, how about Danielle?
Why don't we let Aaron go first, since I went first last time?
Sure.
I actually just have a question. Are there a lot of utilities that aren't paying, that have that low an income level, that aren't already paying 1.5% of their MHI in rates? Like how often does this come up?
Yeah, well, especially when the incomes are a little bit higher, it's harder to have that 1.5%, or when the communities are larger, they don't need to be as high of rates. Like sometimes we'll see rates like in the $30 range, for example, and they might still be able to operate and maintain their system and have sufficient rates to do that. But, you know, if they were that low, that community would not be eligible for grants. So it really depends.
Okay, now I'll go. I would say, so in thinking about the rapid distribution of this funding and the fact that it needs to be encumbered by 2024, and just when you think about a process to raise rates within a system, I would say that, again, kind of going back to this issue of flexibility, that, you know, like you said, you're still looking in terms of, you know, the capacity and the operation of the system and that sort of thing. And I think that's a really important step. But I would support expanding this criteria as well, just to allow, you know, these projects to be implemented quickly. And then, I think like Dawn had mentioned, really have a conversation about water rates and, if there's anything we need to adjust. But again, just going back to flexibility, the more projects that can be funded under this, I think would be important.
Thank you, Danielle. Dawn White.
Yeah, thank you. I'm supportive of all the expanded criteria, but I'm still thinking about that 1.5%. And when you're talking about the first category, consolidation projects, if a small system is going to be consolidated, then if their rates were low, they're going to be absorbed into another system. So it's probably not relevant there. But if you have systems that have low rates and they're applying for this grant, I think that suggests that the rates aren't sufficient to keep them, sustainable without assistance. And so I think especially for category D through F, the rate criteria should remain. I think I'm agreeing now with the first category. Under certain circumstances, it may not be applicable, but I think it is in this category. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kerry, please.
Hi, so this is Coachella Valley Water District. Well, I support all the potential changes, and I do actually agree with Danielle. We are one of those districts that have very low rates and have need of the grant funding. We do have an expanded disadvantaged community. It has been challenging to raise the rates because of the low income areas. We, in the last couple of years, we have not been eligible because of these rates, and then we had to resort to loans to finance a lot of these improvements and consolidations that the district has been pursuing. So I actually, on the opposite side of Ton, I do support eliminating this 1.5% MHI to allow our communities to be eligible for the grant.
Okay, and looks like we have a question or comment from Omar Castro, please.
Nope, just wanted to say that I'm in favor, and I believe that removing the 1.5% would be far more beneficial to some of these smaller communities.
Thank you. Paul Wood.
Yeah, I'm gonna unfortunately for some back up Dawn again on this one, because same argument. I know it's difficult. I'm in a disadvantaged community, and I know it's a rough ride, but I think the bigger issue is trying to get to a sustainable system, and it's not easy. So I would say I think the minimum should still be in there.
Do we have any further comments? Seeing none, I'll pass it back to Bridget. Thanks.
Great. So the last topic that we're looking for your feedback on is the available construction incentive funding for a receiving water system. The receiving water system is the public water system that provides service to a subsumed water system through consolidation or extension of service. So it's that larger system that's going to take them on. An incentive project is a construction project that solely benefits that receiving water system. So it's different than the work needed to consolidate the actual system. Consolidation incentives may be applied to one or more drinking water state revolving fund or safe and affordable drinking water eligible project chosen by the receiving water system. Consolidation incentives may include, but aren't limited to, infrastructure improvements to mitigate drinking water risks and support the human right to water, operation and maintenance support, refinancing of existing loans, and then loan forgiveness to the extent allowable by applicable statutes. The current language in our Drinking Water State Revolving Fund intended use plan doesn't clarify if a receiving water system can get more incentive funding if they consolidate multiple communities or systems. Because consolidations are a priority for the State Water Board, we propose that the consolidation incentive is clarified to make additional incentive available to those larger receiving water systems that consolidate multiple communities or multiple systems. So now we will begin taking comments and questions on the proposal to make additional consolidation incentives available to receiving water systems.
Dawn?
I have a question, and as I was listening to you and reading this, did you say including O&M type projects?
So typically we don't pay for O&M through the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Program, but we can do it through our Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Program. So yes, that is a possibility.
So in which of these categories, so that's not the financing, it would be an incentive project?
It would be an incentive project. I believe we've just done one of these currently. Ideally, what we would like to do is if the receiving water system has a big project that they want to do, for example, like they will say the receiving water system needs to replace all their water meters. That could be an incentive project, or if they wanted to drill a new well or do something like that that's specific to that larger water system. However, sometimes the larger water system doesn't have an infrastructure project that they need done. And so we could do some of these other options, such as operation and maintenance support.
I understood that the IUP allowed for some O&M coverage under for receiving systems to cover like revenue shortfalls that were created by the consolidated system for a short period of time. Is that what this is, or is that separate?
So that would be separate. I'm actually going to see if Megan wants to chime in on.
Just trying, there's so much stuff going on. I'm just trying to clarify how all this fits together.
Yeah, so the fund expenditure plan talks about being able to fund O&M sort of during the period that it takes to get the smaller system connected and to adopt rates, and in that transitional period. Another thing we're looking at that we have done in one case so far with this incentive idea is we essentially provided O&M funds to help fund like a reserve account to ensure operation and maintenance of the pipeline that was built as part of the consolidation project. So that's sort of one way we could see this playing out, but I think this will be, evolving into different types of scenarios as we address, the needs of individual systems and projects.
Well, I think it's very interesting. I guess it's, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out and what types of projects or how systems want to take advantage of this, or if it does truly act as an incentive. So I don't have a real opinion per se, but I look forward to, watching this play out. Thank you.
Yeah, we're hoping that am I echoing? That the idea of being able to get incentive for, projects that benefit their own larger system will really help encourage consolidations.
I would think so. Thank you.
Thank you. Brent, please.
Yeah, hi, I want to talk about the $10 million per consolidated community system bullet here. So, here in Placer County, we've got a number of small systems having lots of needs. So PCWA, we are a county-wide special district. We have very broad powers throughout the county related to water, power, and environmental stewardship. And we kind of see ourselves as a safety net for all of these small systems out there. And we're working on a number of consolidations, but one area of the county, there is a large number of small systems having lots of needs. And so the idea of a regional project, I mean, is makes a lot of sense to PCWA. And so, you know, I strong support for the 10 million per consolidated community system. The project, you know, we got 19 public water systems within an 8-mile stretch of the Interstate 80 corridor coming up the hill out of Auburn. And we just think it makes a lot of sense to look at this as one big project where we're pulling in a lot of these small community systems and regionalizing surface water treatment in one community with a project that extends infrastructure that allows these small systems to connect. So to me, this makes perfect sense, and so strong support on this item here.
Thank you for that. Erin, please.
All right, so we've got a lot of consolidations that we're trying to complete, and some of them do involve multiple systems, although sometimes this might get almost ridiculous at some point where you're talking about us doing a single project where we're tying in, 7 small systems, but each of them have 3 customers, and they're all along one street. And we're now talking about getting $70 million potentially in an incentive project. That seems like it might be, I mean, on the one hand, I'm coming from the utility side, like, great, give me lots of money. I hate to shoot myself in the foot here, but as a taxpayer, it seems a little bit too sweet a pot in those types of cases. If it really is more effort to add more systems, then I think that you need to keep making the incentives there. I really feel like the thing that's keeping these from happening, though, isn't necessarily a lack of the incentives being sweet enough. In my experience, we're just the paperwork of trying to get these projects going and actually being successful with them is a much bigger burden, and is what's keeping us from embracing, going forth and finding more systems to consolidate, is that we can't even get through the ones that are screaming needs and are very obvious consolidations for us. And that I just want to say that maybe we can invest some of this money we're trying to drive towards incentives, towards finding ways to streamline and make the process smoother. And that might actually result in more consolidations.
Thank you for your comment, Erin. I just wanted to point to one thing, because your point is definitely very valid as far as, like, if you're only consolidating a small amount, but technically there are multiple systems, can you get up to 70 million? It does say up to, because there are different cases. So if that was the case, we probably wouldn't give 70 million to a particular receiving water system for doing a smaller project. But we would have the ability to, in case like they were pulling in some of these larger ones. The other thing I want to point out is, in order to be eligible for this, the communities that would be consolidated would need to have at least 15 connections or 25 people. So a system with 3 connections would be different. And we would, the grant part, that's that second bullet, it says up to 5 million in grant funding for disadvantaged communities, but the funding is based on how many connections. So if there's only a few connections, you're not going to be eligible for as much grant funding for that. And then the other thing I wanted to say, as far as with your point too, again, a very valid point as far as getting the applications to move through quicker. That's one of the things that we're trying to do here, as far as making projects potentially eligible for up to 100% grant, because then we have less application requirements, less review on our side as far as making sure that somebody could afford a loan, especially when it's a consolidation project. Loans are really hard with that because the receiving water system wouldn't want to pay for a loan for these new customers. So they can't do that. So the new customers normally would have to have some sort of an assessment district or figure out a way to pay for that little loan component. And that definitely adds a challenge.
Thank you, Megan. And Danielle, I'm going to take your comment in just a moment, but I do want to remind those who are participating today as attendees. I do see one person with their hand raised. If you have a question or comment, you can ask that question through Zoom's Q&A feature. Okay. And Danielle, go ahead, please.
Really quickly, I just wanted to say I do support the idea of expanding the potential for incentive financing. I think that's important. I recognize and appreciate a lot of what Aaron mentioned, and I also appreciate the follow-up comments from you, Bridget, talking about how you all look at this. But I think this, especially if you're talking about maybe like 2 systems or something like that, it would be helpful to have this additional incentive.
Omar Castro, please.
So I do like the incentive program. I do have a question relating to being in the process through consolidation. Is this strictly for new or any already approved projects?
So the consolidation incentive funding is currently on our intended use plan. The edits are on the slide in red because right now it doesn't specify that receiving water system could receive more incentive funding if they do more consolidations. The IUP is also ideally, when a consolidation project happens, ideally we want to know what that incentive project is that the receiving water system wants to do. Previously, we had a requirement in our IUP that a complete application needed to be in by a certain date. We have it a little bit more flexible in our intended use plan, but ideally we want to at least have a general application, an idea from that receiving water system of what that incentive project is at time of funding of the consolidation project. Again, we do have a little bit of flexibility. So if it was done recently, I would work with the project manager that you have and see if it's something that we could work with you on.
And do we have any further comments? Okay, seeing none. Okay, I'm going to pass it back to Bridget. Thank you.
Great. So at this point, we have looked at a bunch of different options for how we could potentially use these drinking water infrastructure funds. So at this time, we would like to open it up for any additional input that you guys have on this funding.
Okay. Looks like we have a comment from Danielle.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of comments. I would encourage the board. I really appreciate the fact that you all are looking at ways to expand eligibility and provide additional flexibility in the creative approach. That's really helpful. I would encourage the board to also look if there are other opportunities to just kind of streamline the process to make things go a little quicker. I know there's probably a lot of pressure given the amount of money in the short amount of time. So, application processes and various other elements, I think, would be helpful, including, I know there was a comment about the consolidation assessment and just, depending on the system and depending on the application, if there's ways to look if there's flexibility in that area regarding the need to do that assessment. I know it's a priority of the board, but just wanted to comment. And then a quick question. I know we talked a lot about disadvantaged communities today and expanding it to medium DACs, which again, I appreciate, but how is prioritization going to work? I know there's language in statute about prioritizing DACs, but is it we're going to fund all of the disadvantaged communities until they're all funded and we'll exhaust all funds, or are you looking at a certain percentage, and then other systems would be eligible for the funding as well?
So at this point, based on the proposals that we're throwing out there right now, the only non-disadvantaged communities that would potentially be eligible would be those small non-disadvantaged communities for the category A through C or consolidation type projects, or again, a receiving water system to receive incentive funding. And, you know, it's something that if the funding isn't getting out that quickly, we could definitely look at increasing the way that we are planning on giving out the grant funding at a later date.
Yeah, I would just really encourage the board to look at that, because I know, you know, it's good that small non-disadvantaged communities are as part of this conversation, but I think, you know, there are a lot of medium sized and even some large that have needs and have you know, rates that are, you know, in the ballpark of what is appropriate. And so I think just looking at that, and, you know, I know there's a prioritization and that's great. I think that's important, but if there's opportunity to provide funding to some of the non-disadvantaged communities, I think that would be helpful.
Thank you, Danielle. Do we have any additional input or questions? Brent?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. So again, you know, I think that this is such an important body of work that is being undertaken here. And so I would just encourage the state, wherever possible, to utilize local government to help with this important work. And trust is so important. And so many of us throughout the state have worked long and hard to establish a trust with our customers. And so, you know, I want to use the example of, you know, 6 years ago, the state Division of Financial Assistance came to us and they had a funding fair that they wanted to know if we'd be willing to host. And we said, of course. And you know, we packed the room. Small systems throughout our county came. And as we went around the room, you know, and kind of did a check-in before the meeting, the number one objective of every small system that showed up was, how do we get PCWA to take over our system? So there, we don't need to, you know, I mean, sell this. The need is out there. A lot of these small systems understand their systems are at, and their assets are at end of life. They're not finding volunteers from within their community to run the systems, do the work necessary to produce safe drinking water. So wherever possible, use local government to help with this work. And then a comment on the process. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. In the timeline. So a consolidation that we just wrapped up here in Placer County, we started on that 6 years ago, and we finished construction just several months ago. And so when I look at this timeline, you know, 2.5 years to fully encumber these funds and another 2 years beyond that to have them liquidated, this is going to be a challenge. And so just let's, you know, hopefully there can be some process improvements in the timeline. And then again, regionalization, I think, is key. Economy of scale is so important. So those are kind of my concluding comments, I believe.
Okay, thank you for that. Dawn.
Yeah, I think I'm going to repeat a bit of that, but my remarks are really just acknowledging that there's incredible need out there in a lot of systems. And so I appreciate the expanded criteria. I think that makes us more available to more systems. And it always takes a long time, but having, more that can move through the process, it is better in getting this spent. I think there's an incredible opportunity with the amount of funding in place right now, that there really is an opportunity to fix what's going on out there. The processes are problematic, and I appreciate all of the work that's being done to streamline those processes. I think it's very, very well acknowledged how hard it is to get through the process, and I know that it's being worked on, and then we appreciate that. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Kerry?
Thank you. And I do want to say thank you to the board as well for coming up with this expanded and flexibility, to change some of the criterias. Again, we are one of the largest districts in the state, and we do encompass a lot of multiple cities and sections, and we do have a large retirement community as well. So sometimes they don't technically fall in a disadvantaged area, but they do have limited capacity to sustain the rates. And we do have a lot of projects that we've been working on with the State Water Resource Board, and a lot of them really would benefit in terms of the water supply as well, that will benefit other areas. And so we have been kind of resorting into loans because of the strict criteria. So this expansion on that criteria and the flexibility would significantly help a lot of our communities and to fulfill a lot of the projects, the needed projects that we have. And as you know, we have the Avenue 66, which is a huge project that needs to be addressed fairly quickly, as it affects multiple areas in the community. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Danielle?
Sorry, just one more clarifying question. So today we've been talking about the $600 million that is part of the Budget Act, and in talking about the expansion of this eligibility, incentives, et cetera. Is that just for the purposes of the $500 or $600 million, or is that something where you're looking at expanding the criteria for the entire drinking water SRF?
So the criteria in the intended use plan would be applicable for all the funding that we give out, sort of under that umbrella, including the SRF, principal forgiveness, bond funds. And sort of another bigger picture concept that we haven't yet gotten into is that we're going to get a huge influx of new money from the federal infrastructure bill that was recently passed. And so, these changes would inform funding decisions for all of that moving forward. It's, we kind of co-manage all of the funding, so it's not practical for us to have different funding limitations for individual funding sources. We kind of, run it all under a single set of criteria.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Part of the benefit for having all the different funding under one particular criteria is that there's one application that people submit versus submitting an application for different funding pots and then having to do a different application for something else. So it does help with the review of applications and to make the whole process less confusing.
Can I ask one more follow-up? Sorry. I know there's a set aside in the statute about money for administrative costs for this additional money. So can you talk a little bit about how those administrative costs are going to be spent?
Let me see that one, Bridget. So again, we kind of manage our staff and resources in a similar fashion where, we have a tapestry of different administrative funding sources that support staff that work on projects that are funded with multiple funding sources, so it's kind of all integrated. We did have some staff that were added specifically as a result of this new allocation that we're incorporating into, our existing org chart to support project managers and administrative staff, working in the same capacity. I don't know if there's something else more specific that you're looking for there.
No, that's helpful. I'm looking in terms of, I know that the administrative set aside was like, $25-30 million. So I was just looking to see, but I definitely understand the need for more staff, especially as quickly as this money needs to get out the door. So just kind of following up on what additional resources are needed in order to make this program successful.
Thank you. Oh, looks like we have a comment from Joe Karkowski.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. So sorry I'm joining a little late. I've heard probably the last 15 or 20 minutes of the conversation, and Alicia, you can shut me down if I'm messing up the agenda in any way. But part of what I'm hearing are, in addition to feedback on the proposals Bridget went through on incentives, a lot of feedback around, well, yeah, that's great, but there's also a lot of room for improvement in terms of how we actually get to funding projects, especially with consolidations. So, and again, I'll defer to Alicia as the facilitator in terms of how much time we might have, but I would like to hear more specifics about what you're seeing, because I could also give some feedback about what I'm seeing, in terms of where I see some slowdowns. And Dawn sat through 6 hours of the Safer Advisory Group meeting yesterday, so she heard a little bit about some of the things that we're trying to do to streamline, and we can certainly briefly go over a few of those things. But if we don't have time, Alicia, we can also look to maybe have another meeting with this group or an expanded group to maybe dig more deeply into what some of those barriers are and potential solutions.
We actually have quite a bit of time left, so there's no reason why we can't go over that today.
Okay, if the group would like to, I mean, that's part of what I was hearing. So I'd be, more than happy to hear more from you. And, and again, I'd also be happy to sort of start out with a bit of what we're doing. And I can tell you a few of the things that I kind of see, because I always ask the questions, just so you all know, we have these route slips that come through, and I'll look at, wow, why is it taking so long? Or, we got a complete application 2 or 3 years ago. What's happening? I don't get it. Right. And so, and a lot of times when we're sort of digging into the why, there are a variety of reasons, they're sort of, each project seems to be a snowflake. So if that's good with the group, I can see some of you. So if you sort of nod, I'll do a really quick sort of spiel on what we're trying to do to improve, and then some of the things I'm seeing, and then would love to hear, sort of your specific experiences and the thoughts you have on what we could do better. So, okay, I saw enough nods, so I'll go ahead. So just a couple of things, and Bridget probably touched on this, or Megan, that, by going to 100% grant, one of the things that we see is some of our processes, like doing a credit review, can add time, right? And credit review is important when you have to repay a loan. It's not so important when there's 100% grant. The other aspect of that where we run into challenges is sometimes the funding agreement is with the smaller entity that's going to be consolidated. So that adds some complication, right? So if you're doing a credit review on a failing system, they're probably going to fail that credit review, right? Even though ultimately they're going to be subsumed. So we're also working through that. And as some of the larger entities that are, stepping forward to subsume those smaller systems, again, part of the solution is, to the extent you're able to actually, you're the ones applying for the funding, that takes care of a lot of those problems, right? I certainly understand where the larger entity sort of wants to wait, make sure that, like, any infrastructure improvements that are needed in the smaller system occur, in advance of the consolidation, so your ratepayers don't have that burden, but it does, we do run into problems and challenges associated with that. So I know that's one of those complications. It's like, sort of a chicken and egg type of thing, is you may not want to subsume the smaller system until they've got water meters in place, until they've upgraded their distribution system and that sort of thing. We're hesitant to fund them if we know they're going to not be able to guarantee operating and maintaining that capital project for a while. So then a lot of that comes back to, well, what does that consolidation agreement look like? And how many caveats are in there and that sort of thing between the two parties or multiple parties. So one of the things we're trying to do is get our legal counsel involved earlier with you all, with the, with the larger system and the smaller system, to make sure the consolidation agreement you sign is compatible with how our funding agreements are structured, right? So anyway, that's kind of one thing. The other thing we're looking at is certainly when we have small disadvantaged communities that we're consolidating, we have provisions within the intended use plan that allow us to do just state CEQA and not the sort of the CEQA plus with the federal environmental requirements. So that's kind of another step we're taking that saves some time and effort. So I think it sort of jumped around between some of the things we're doing and some of the things I'm seeing, but certainly it does seem like we can run into these complications and hiccups. The other thing that I think we see, and Megan or Bridget, you can jump in on this, is of course, a lot of times there's a preference for the larger system to take over the smaller system. In other cases, that doesn't make as much sense for the larger system, right? You might want a master service agreement with the smaller system, and that will work better. Of course, one of the things we start looking at, because we've run into this before, is, does that smaller system then end up having unaffordable rates, right? Because they pay for whatever water the larger system is delivering, plus, their own kind of internal charges. Sort of one kind of last thought. I think, Bridget, you might have touched on this a bit in terms of the incentive projects. And we did this in one case, just so you all know, is we want to do all we can to help the larger system and make sure there really is, at a minimum, no cost, but also some benefit to taking on these smaller systems. So we did have, like, it was relatively recently, I think, Bridget, it was one of your projects where, the larger system came back to us and said, hey, we went pretty quickly to do this consolidation. We didn't design things ideally. We should have had a looped system. So we want to put in that additional infrastructure, but we don't want to have our larger original customer base on the hook for that. So can you help out? So we have helped out in that case, right? We were able to justify that, even though the smaller system was now subsumed and part of the larger system, and they theoretically wouldn't have qualified for grant, we figured out a way of making it work. So I just put that out there as an example to say, we want to make this work. Okay. One last thought, and then I really want to hear from you all, is we do also have situations where a larger system doesn't feel like they can dedicate the staff time to do the planning, be engaged in the planning or get a planning agreement, et cetera, because you can't justify that, right? It's like, okay, this isn't benefiting our ratepayers. So another option that we have and can certainly deploy is having our technical assistance providers do that planning and design. And one of the things we're working on is when our TA providers do that, also allowing for the larger system to charge some staff time to that, sort of through our TA provider, so that, any cost you're incurring as part of that process can get reimbursed. So, all right, I'll be quiet now and be happy to hear any sort of feedback or thoughts.
Erin McCauley.
Okay, since I'm one of the people who raised this issue, I think I'm going to start off by saying I think we're really bad at getting grants on our side, in that that's not our core business. It's even some of the language you guys are speaking here, and I'm one of the people who's probably more familiar with grants in our organization. It's hard for us to even figure out where we qualify. How do we get in this? I work for a large investor-owned utility, so I feel like we should have a better skill at this, and we're trying to get it. But part of this is even getting to the point of getting that application in has been arduous in some cases, going through multiple technical assistance providers because I don't know what they were doing. I don't know how they didn't end up getting to the point of getting a grant in, but we're sitting on the sidelines trying to figure out how to get there, looping around back and forth about who's going to take the grant. I'm hoping that the new federal legislation will have addressed that and we can start taking grants. But then that raises a whole nother host of questions on our side about what we're actually going to get paid back for. We found in the past when we've taken grants, we've seen having to absorb quite a few costs. Now it's things that should be built in. If we were a consultant, would be built in, but because of the way that we structure labor on our end, it seems like people are trying to cheap out and covering our true costs of labor, like our supervisory costs and other things like that we build into overhead. Now, it's one thing if we were getting a grant to cover something that we were going to do anyway, but when we're getting a grant to cover a consolidation, which in theory should not impact our existing customers, that can be quite a problem if we're going to be taking on a significant fraction of costs because things are not covered in grant. I think I would like to see the office working more directly with the Public Utilities Commission to work out the issues that we share. It seems like if we can get things worked out on the water board side, then we still have the commission holding things up. And consolidations take 2 to 3 years with typical consolidations. One, I don't think they should take that long. I think even ones that aren't for disadvantaged communities that we want to do, we should get through faster. And frankly, the same staff are working on both. So if you want us to take the disadvantaged communities, maybe making it easier for us to do consolidations that we'd like to do and make that whole process smoother and helping the Public Utilities Commission. I mean, you guys are all at the state. Sometimes we're like, hey, you guys work it out yourselves. And that doesn't it seems like we get different direction from both sides. And then there's also just sort of my pet peeves, like the TMF form process. If you're begging us to take over systems, I feel like asking us to prove again and again and again that we're technically and managerially, financially responsible enough to do that is something that I just shouldn't have to do it. And it takes, you're like, oh, just bother. It's like, yeah, it takes 8 hours of time just to fill the darn thing out, even in a half-assed way. Sorry, I used the cuss word there. But yeah, so I'd like to see that process completely eliminated for large utilities. And then the last thing I guess we have trouble with is the MHI. I don't think we really understand it, and we don't understand how to break it down. When you have a community that's a small piece of a census block, and we're relying on the technical assistance partners, which at this point I just don't trust to get us through the process. And that piece alone seems to be very confusing for us. So any help on that area would be helpful. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox.
Okay, I want to thank you for that. And, maybe something you could follow up with Megan on. We can organize a specific discussion with the investor-owned utilities, because there are a lot of unique aspects to that. And like you suggested, Aaron, bring in the PUC into that same discussion.
Thank you, Erin. Danielle?
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to ask a question regarding the consolidation assessment that's part of the drinking water SRF. So if the proposal is to expand and allow for some medium disadvantaged communities to be able to apply and get this funding, we have in our member or in CMUA's membership, and I know in AWWA's membership as well, there are some of these medium disadvantaged communities, and they probably have a project that's in the D through F category. But, you know, otherwise, you know, they're functional. And so when there's a consolidation assessment, is it for that system that wants the funding to determine whether they can be consolidated into other systems, or is it whether they can consolidate other systems? How does the assessment work? Because I think, especially if you're talking about these medium disadvantaged communities, they may not be geographically close, or they may be part of a city, or, you know, there may be other factors where maybe the consolidation assessment isn't appropriate, but I'd like to understand a little bit about how the assessment actually works.
Yeah, so the assessment that's part of the project report or feasibility report is more so as far as if they want to, or if they could consolidate into another system. So looking at nearby systems that have capacity, or what it might take to consolidate into a nearby larger system or similar size system, rather than, you know, sometimes it'll require a huge replacement of existing infrastructure. So before we end up completely redoing existing infrastructure, seeing if it makes sense for that system, the smaller system, to consolidate with somebody nearby. So it isn't typically to look at, you know, who could they take on. That could be something else that they do, if that's something that they know that there's other systems that they want to pull in, and we do see that sometimes. We definitely encourage that. And you know, if they could pull in smaller systems as part of the project, then that obviously makes the project a little bit more massive, and they'd want to build for a higher capacity, and you know, it's going to take a lot more work to work with the different systems and the different communities to make sure other people are on board as well. But we could definitely do that too.
And the state board is the ultimate arbiter in what's feasible and infeasible, right? It's not like a disadvantaged community city that may have, you know, 5,500 connections and, you know, applies for funding. And they said, you know, we're the largest system in our area, so it doesn't make sense for us to consolidate with a larger system. That would be up to the water board to decide, right?
I would say that's true, but in the type of situation that you're describing, you know, it's sort of understood the, you know, realities that you're explaining, that, you know, we're not going to require some like really, really extensive cost estimate of the cost of consolidation if it's fairly clear at the face that that's not a reasonable expectation for that individual system, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Danielle, did you have any further comments? Okay, Brent?
Yeah, I want to, first of all, I want to make it very clear that I very much appreciate Joe's comment that you're all trying to make it work, and that there are a lot of improvements that you're working on. I get that, and I get that it's complicated, and also that, you know, let's not forget these are like sacred funds, and there's never going to be enough money, and you need to safeguard and prioritize those funds and use them where they can do the best amount of work. I get all of that. So we've struggled a little bit on just knowing how to get into the process, and you know, the technical assistance piece, you know, as I think of PCWA as kind of a large you know, water district. We have 7 systems here in our county, and so we know, I think we know what needs to be done. You know, we are willing to do the planning. We're willing put forth that initial effort to consolidate and regionalize where it's appropriate. And so sometimes we don't want to jump in and go back to the planning process. We want to, we're ready to engage in constructing infrastructure. And so just having, picking up the phone, I guess, and knowing who to call and say, hey, we've got this idea. Can we sit down and talk about it? That would be real helpful. And so I guess, flexibility in the process and is important. But again, I appreciate all of the effort down there in terms of timing and streamlining the process for funding.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. And you're with Placer County, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So I guess what I believe we're meeting. Are we meeting like on a monthly basis with you and your team?
Yeah, we are doing that.
Okay, that's great. So what I would say, and I'd encourage everyone to be aware of this is, when you're seeing things that don't necessarily make sense, or you're sort of struggling with, like, how do we get moving? It's like we've got something together where we're an agency entity that's sort of we've got our act together. We have some systems we want to help, but we feel like we're running into these barriers because a lot of times your entry into our system is appropriately with our staff, right? And that makes sense. And by and large, our staff are really great at understanding how to manage the routine kind of projects. So, and there's a benefit to having structure, right, and consistency in how we do things. Now, that being said, it's like when we have opportunities to do something more aggressively on a broader scale, our staff aren't necessarily going to be able to understand how to accommodate that or understand, like, what are you asking? How can we do it? So in those cases, I would say, like Bridget or Megan, or, you might work with Dad or whoever, or Christopher or Mike, they're aware of those things and how we can effectively engage in those conversations and figure out how to move forward more quickly. Or, you can reach out to me as well. Because our overall charge, coming from, governor's office to Cal EPA, our board members, et cetera, and our own motivation is to have these projects get in place as quickly as possible. And it's our responsibility at our level to help figure out how to make that happen. So I don't want folks getting sort of feel like they're hitting these roadblocks and they're struggling, and part of it, I think, maybe just needing to elevate those issues, and don't feel like, you're circumventing our staff or anything like that. It's just, it's part of our job at our level is to try to break some of those log jams. They may be log jams that we sort of created by the policies and procedures we put in place to ensure consistency and efficiency, but that doesn't work in these more complex situations and cases. Like I think you mentioned earlier, I think you might have said, well, can we do something on a more regional scale? And it's like, yeah, we'd love to do that so that we can be more efficient and, like, let's get I forget how many systems you said, but let's get all of those systems that want to be consolidated. Let's do that as quickly as we can, and we can streamline some of the processes that we might normally have to go through.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you. Kerry?
Hi, thank you. So yeah, for Coachella, we do, kind of want to echo some of the issues that we're kind of encountering as well. We do have such a significant amount of applications, a lot of effort are put in to apply for grants. and we get turned around because we do have a 110,000 customer base, and then gets turned around to get it into a loan. And it takes us a lot of effort. Sometimes, we have to determine already if we need something. We have to apply 2 years in advance to find out whether we're going to get the funding or not, or going to turn into a loan. And so I think those are the kind of the areas that maybe we can kind of look into a little bit more in terms of how to kind of get a little bit more of in terms of, maybe a little bit more, not efficiency. I don't want to say that word efficiency, but how do we kind of speed up some of these things? Because we have a lot of projects that are coming up that are emergency projects that we need to determine funding for, some of our failing systems. So how do we've kind of been like turning into trying to look for alternative funding sources, whether we issue a bond for some of these larger projects, because of the timing that the time that it takes for us to apply for whether it's a loan or a grant, for a lot of these larger projects that is phasing Coachella. I think right now we have approximately 18 active applications and 33 that's we've determined whether it's a loan. But again, it's not all domestic water. I mean, it's not all drinking water. I understand. We work with the state a lot. We do have canal water. We have a lot of replenishment systems. But there is a need for us to finance over $370 million worth of projects to support our system. So, I think those are the areas that sometimes kind of get boggled down in terms of the length of time, the amount of effort that we put in from environmental to the TA, and then to get turned around and then said, oh, you're just going to qualify for a loan and not the grant. Kind of takes a lot of effort for us and a lot of cost that we cannot recoup back, trying to go through the process.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. Yeah, again, I would encourage you to, I think we should have a separate discussion. I know you have a lot in the queue with us, so maybe having a separate discussion with, our executive level kind of management team here at Division of Financial Assistance, as well as your folks, I think would be really helpful. So, and the reality is going to be, we're going to be able to move a lot quicker with these 100% grant projects. We're trying to, as best we can, be dynamic. Like as we get these additional resources, it creates this opportunity, right? That's sort of this whole point of what, Bridget and Megan were talking about. So we have this opportunity now with more resources to provide more 100% grant. We don't have to worry about as much as before as like, gee, we have a relatively small pie, so let's make sure we're, getting those resources where the greatest need is, right? With the, sort of public health issues and that sort of thing, we can be hopefully more generous. So that being said, when you start talking about loans, that becomes more challenging. And part of what my reflection or maybe pushback to you would be, because I've heard this from our attorneys, is each loan with each of the entities in SRF becomes its own unique thing. So when that's the case, right, and where sort of some of the standard conditions we have may not work for your particular entity, that creates this long kind of negotiation process. But we can talk separately about that. Certainly I think Christopher was on the line before, and so we can both discuss sort of the loans you have in the queue and how we might process those more quickly, as well as how we can work with you on addressing needs of your disadvantaged communities, both on the drinking water side and the wastewater side as well.
Thank you. Erin.
This is just a question, because we've been working a lot with the folks from the SAFER program, and I don't see them on this line, and I'm trying to figure out what that interaction is and if we're maybe talking to the wrong people.
So Joe, do you want, okay. So the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions, which is the branch that I oversee, one of the sections is the SAFER section. And then we have the two other sections, one of which Bridget oversees. So, it kind of just ends up depending upon, where your project manager sits within those sections. We do have some project managers in the SAFER section that are managing, these SRF consolidation type projects. And so, I think you're talking to the right people, but like Joe said, if you're feeling that there's, uncertainty with your project manager and they're not maybe sure how to navigate kind of unique circumstances, definitely feel free to, elevate to their senior or contact me and we can help you, navigate some of those things.
Yeah, so I got a note from Michelle Frederick. I think she's watching, but Alicia, maybe she needs to be brought on as a panelist and she can kind of jump in. But yeah.
So, yeah. Well, Joe, that's reminding me, maybe, are you talking about within the Division of Financial Assistance or the Division of Drinking Water? It could be a question.
Yeah. So I think it's both. And that can be, sometimes confusing, right? Is our Division of Drinking Water has a sort of what they call a SAFER section, and Michelle has community engagement groups. And oftentimes they take kind of a lead role in having discussions around consolidations, and as those kind of go further, then our the Division of Financial Assistance is often brought in. So Alicia, I don't know if we have Michelle available yet, but so
I just promoted her. So
okay, all right. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, and Aaron, I think you may be talking about our staff, which is why I texted Joe. Yes, I mean, certainly our staff in the Division of Drinking Water does a lot of the initial outreach. We do a lot of the discussions on what could be done, just like we've been doing with you, Aaron. So, and then as we sort of transition and it gets more into sort of the core funding work, then we start bringing in Division of Financial Assistance, SAFER folks, or their, other project managers and roll that forward. And at some point, when it gets far enough along, we'll probably pull out and DFA will take it the rest of the way. So there's different pieces of what we do. I hope that helps.
And maybe, Michelle, for context, you can tell everybody how many different potential consolidation opportunities are you and your team looking at?
So we are tracking right now about 200 across the state, where we're either, and those don't include sort of where we are doing just outreach. We're also doing outreach. We've probably done about 750 letters since June, sort of indicating to folks, hey, you're nearby, you should think about consolidation. We've done at least 10 plus water partnership meetings, trying to get folks interested that may have gotten a letter. Different parts of the state, that's worked better than others. Some places it's been really huge out, we were able to bring in a lot of people, other places not so much. So going back and thinking about how we redo that. But yeah, so we are tracking about 200 where we're in discussions with various people. We also in our group do mandatory consolidations, and we also do administrators too. So there's a couple of different pieces, and those I think are more distinct from DFA and our relationship there. That's more of a regulatory role that we have. And so that sort of stays more in our shop. But yeah, thanks, Aaron, for clarifying, because there is overlap and then there are differences.
thank you, Michelle. Do we have any further comments? No? Okay. Well, seeing none, I'm going to pass it back to Bridget, and we're going to talk about the next steps and how best to stay informed.
Great. So thanks again, everybody, for participating in today's discussion. So from here, we're planning to use your feedback to help prepare a proposal that we are going to take to our board in February for approval. And then we plan on posting that proposal in December. It's mid-December is what we're shooting for. And then we're going to host a public meeting mid-December as well on that proposal. And then from there, there will be a public comment period of 30 days before we take it to our board for approval. So if you have additional comments, you could definitely reach out to us at that time or beforehand. If you'd like to make sure that you stay informed on both this funding as well as other drinking water funding, we encourage you to I'm stumbling over all my words. We encourage you to subscribe to the email list for drinking water state revolving fund that's on this slide.
Well, I just want to thank Megan and Bridget and Joe and everyone working behind the scenes answering questions. And thanks to all of our panelists and the attendees as well. We got some really great input today. We appreciate it and I want to wish all of you a great rest of your day and weekend. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, and happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.